You're listening to Halftime with Phil Elson, Matty T, and Matt Jenkins.
Who did they lose to, an 8 seed? Or are they losing to St. Mary's in triple overtime in the final? Now, I think they're exactly where they should be based upon their overall body of work. Sometimes it's not the easiest route. Sometimes it's who's the best team.
The bubble is very soft here.
All right, let's talk about it. I think this may be an unprecedented year in terms of a lack of movement on the top line. I never feel good about my bracket. I feel much better about the bracket on Selection Sunday morning vis-a-vis the committee, because then I know what I'm doing.
Here's ESPN bracketologist Joe Lunardi.
All right, let's go right to the phone lines where Joe Lunardi, ESPN bracketologist, was waiting. Joe, I know your time is precious. We're going to go ahead and get right into it. What is Arkansas's path that you envision how they make the NCAA tournament?
I think Al Davis probably said it best when he ran the Raiders back in the day. Just win, baby, because they've really run out of margin for error, I believe. I mean, I suppose there's a scenario where you win these last two games, you get to 8 and 10 in the league, win a couple games, get to the final in Nashville, lose the great game in the final, and sneak in as an at-large. But I think those odds are extremely low, and I think the Razorbacks are going to need the automatic bid.
Joe, how much do you think the NCAA selection committee is going to take into account Isaiah Joe's injury and his impact off the floor with this basketball team?
I think it's a factor for sure. I think without it, we wouldn't even be having the conversation. Because if they had lost those 5 games with Isaiah Joe, people would simply say they're not a very good basketball team, or at least they haven't maximized their potential. I think that it's, in a way, the only thing that's keeping them in the conversation at the moment, because the wins just aren't there, and you can't, presume that they're going to, beat Auburn or beat Mississippi State or beat Florida, some of the games that they lost when he was out. You can't assume a win because they lost a bunch of games when they had him, and they've lost again since he's been back. So, yes, I think it's a factor. Is it a big enough factor? No.
Speaking with ESPN bracketologist Joe Lunardi. Joe, just kind of curious, too, what teams should the Razorback fans be looking at that are above them on the bubble, just to kind of see, what teams do we need to have loose to maybe even strengthen the Razorbacks' chances of maybe potentially getting an at-large bid if we win and we win the games we're supposed to win? Sure. What team should we be looking out for?
Sure. Well, let's go with the first part of it first. You need to be rooting against like the Wichita States and the Cincinnatis and the Richmonds and the Rhode Island. Bubble teams from the American, bubble teams from the Atlantic 10 that could, grab spots. You need to be rooting against other bubble teams from the SEC, like Mississippi State and Tennessee, because you lost to them. And their games, like, you've got to somehow show that your profile is better than that. And in terms of rooting for, you want to root for teams that you beat, like Indiana, for instance, or maybe Alabama, to kind of have more value. Rooting for Alabama is a double-edged sword because they might be stealing your own spot. But Indiana would really be the only non-conference team on the list that can help the Hogs at this point.
There was an article published on your bracketology page on ESPN. It was talking about the comparison to this year's Razorback team to the 1992 Iowa State team, kind of in the same similar position that the Razorbacks are in. Iowa State that year had Fred Holberg, that had a 5-9 conference record, and they got an at-large bid. Is there any, in your opinion, any comparisons with that team to this year's team?
Well, there have only been 2 at-large teams in history that got in 4 games under 500 in their league. The one was the Iowa State team you mentioned, back when the Big 12 was actually the Big 8. And last year's Oklahoma team got in at 7 and 11. You certainly wouldn't want to roll that dice And in both cases, Oklahoma last year and certainly Iowa State from 30 years ago, as nicely as I can see, they had better wins than this Arkansas team does. They don't have a lot to hang their hat on.
Joe, I thought Greg Sankey's media mentions were bad on social media, and then I saw yours during bracketology season. What do you think the biggest misconception is from fans about your job on a daily basis?
That I sleep. That would be high on my list. No, I think it probably is this, fellas. And I get it. When your face is on a screen, generally, if people aren't happy with what you say, it's because you're saying their team isn't going to make it, or their team is not going to be seeded as well as they think. And if I was up there, doing all happy roses and flowers all the time, they probably wouldn't put me on. But I think it's important for people to remember, it's not my opinion of how I would rank a team.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I think the committee is going to do this year with these circumstances, right? Every other analyst in the sport, on whatever channel you break, is saying what their opinion is about a team. I'm trying to apply data and say not what I think should happen, but what's going to happen if the committee functions as it has in the past. So I kind of have to check my ego and my opinion at the door. Now that's hard to do, right? Because, I have favorites too. I'm a fan also. And, I might really like, Eric Musselman and the Hogs.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look at it objectively, the resume is just not very good, and the SEC isn't very deep, so their odds are long because of that. So whether I would vote them in as an at-large doesn't matter, because I'm fairly certain at this point that the committee's not going to.
So, Joe, you mentioned Arkansas and Eric Musselman. I'm wondering, you've been doing this a while now. When you look at Arkansas as a college basketball brand, at one point they were Tier 1 in the 90s when Nolan had that thing going, but now it's dropped to more Tier 2, Tier 3. Do you think the Razorback basketball program under Eric Musselman is going to get back to the point where they're in the same category as a North Carolina, a Duke, a Kentucky? Can they get back to that Tier 1 status with him at the helm?
Well, let's remember that the Tier 1 status exists for a reason. The elite of the elite. Duke, Carolina, Kansas, whoever else, Michigan State. And now I would put Gonzaga in that group. They're going to have guests at the table from time to time, but they're elite because they do it the most often. And I don't know if it's realistic for, Arkansas to be like I would call that the A+ tier, right? The elite.
Mm-hmm.
Can they be an A where they're getting in the tournament, 3 years out of 4? Absolutely. Almost any team in a Power 5 league can be that if they get the right guy, and they get players, and there's no reason why they can't get players given the tradition of Arkansas and the exposure of the SEC. But, over a 10-year period, Arkansas is not going to be Kentucky unless Kentucky's really underachieving and Arkansas is really overachieving its status on the landscape, which happened to happen under Nolan Richardson. You had a Hall of Fame coach who got Hall of Fame players and a national champion. That's the exception, I think. But, to be kind of putzing along at 7-10 or whatever it is in the SEC, that's not something that I think has to be the permanent state of affairs at Arkansas.
Joe, our time with you is up. Joe Lunardi, ESPN bracketologist, kind enough to give us some of his time. We appreciate it. I know it's going to be a grueling next couple weeks for you, but best of luck, and I guess a couple weeks, more like a week or so. And good luck on Selection Sunday, man.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Joe.